Welcome. Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind giving us a like, and consider going ahead and subscribing as well, that would be fantastic. And if you really want to go the extra mile, go down to the description below and click the Patreon link. Lots of cool stuff going on there. As always, I love you, and enjoy the show, guys.
The Deathworlders, a story by user Hambone. Chapter 22, Warhorse. Year 6, Operation Novahound. Part 1. Date point, First Contact Day, 10 years after Vancouver. Capital Station, Capital System, Dominion Space. Officer Regari, Clan Whitecrest, Attaché to the Mother Supreme.
You're both courting a controversy, you know. A scandal, even, given how close you both are to me.
Regari's duck nod of agreement had an unconscious, immature, cubbish quirk to it that came naturally when Guillaumai engaged her mother's instincts. The Mother Supreme was now silver from ear-tip to foot, and thoroughly venerable. Over the years of working together, her relationship with Regari had thawed from purely professional to something of a friendship. But she was still the mother, and when she gave advice, deference was instinctive. "I know," he agreed, reluctantly. "Human ideas, eroding Gowan culture. I've been staying well abreast of the backlash. We both have, which is why we've only talked about it."
Even talking about it is heresy in some camps.
That's a human word.
Indeed, it is.
Regari caught the sad irony in Guillaumai's agreement. "We're a free society," he pointed out. "Free to speak our minds, free to act and do as we please, so long as we cause no harm. Aren't we?"
"So it has been since before the females were united,"
Guillaumai agreed.
"But I note we have never actually been cunning enough to codify those freedoms in law. And in the meantime, some people's ideas of what constitutes harm have broadened, spreading out to cover a wider area, but, I think, becoming shallower in the process."
"The humans need those things coded in law," Regari pointed out. "In fact, they were, from what I gather, something of a revolutionary concept when first introduced. We, meanwhile, have always taken them as self-evident. You don't need a law granting people the freedom to breathe or to eat." Guillaumai chuffed.
"We hold these truths to be self-evident," she quoted.
Regari, being the one who had first introduced that document to her, recognized the quotation instantly, missing, of course, the irony that if they really were self-evident, then they would never have had to write them down. Guillaumai duck-nodded herself.
"Meanwhile, we did find them self-evident,"
she observed. "And yet you're warning me that Aima and I are courting controversy by preferring each other's company?"
"Dare I whisper the word monogamy?"
"It's not. She's had other cubs since mine. It's just that we still enjoy each other's company, and we still feel much the same as we did when we sired that cub." Regari stood and paced the room. And this somehow is a brewing scandal. A male and a female liking each other and wishing to spend time together, rather than simply remembering one another as a fond, temporary dalliance? Perhaps those truths aren't so self-evident after all. Perhaps Gowans have all just thought too much alike up until now. Guillaumai chittered loudly and at length at that one.
Oh,
She gasped, trying to recover.
if only we did. There would be no need for a Mother Supreme, and I could retire and live out my time surrounded by cubs and happy young mothers.
She regained her composure and noticed the slightly offended set of Rigari's ears.
Ah, I am sorry. You may be right. We are discussing the adulteration of our culture by alien ideas, after all.
That was probably inevitable the moment we made first contact, Rigari grumbled.
We know that.
Guillaumai gestured to the station they were aboard.
Many Gowans may not. And this is the root of our problem. We are being changed by these ideas, whether we like it or not. And this is the root of our problem. We are being changed by these ideas, whether we like it or not. These ideas of heresy and taboo are just as much a pollution of what it means to be a Gowan as pizza, pancakes, meditation, and monogamy. Then there's poor Myeon. I never imagined that I'd see the day when a young, healthy, intelligent, and very pretty female was shunned because no male will court her for fear of the political consequences.
Rigari snarled a little angry laugh. They'll hire her to provide hand-to-hand combat instruction, but mating with the freak, he growled a little. If she wasn't young enough to be one of my cubs, I might approach her with a contract myself, just to spite them.
Why not?
Guillaumai asked.
You're already flirting with scandal with Aima, and you'd be actively seeking it by courting Myeon. Why should age make a difference at that point? Maybe your example is all that's needed to rehabilitate an outcast.
Rigari fell silent. He was still considering the suggestion when the communicator in his pocket buzzed. He tapped it with a claw. They're ready for you in the council chamber, he said.
It's about time. Where's my stick?
Rigari handed it to her. Guillaumai had many walking sticks these days, and each one was a calculated statement. For today she had selected the natural, knurled one made of Cimbrian pinkwood, a now extinct species that had once occupied one small portion of a continent that was now long swallowed up by Deathworlder terraforming. The humans had logged the lot, rather than let it be ruined by the advancing tide of disease, and had sold the wood to collectors to drum up funds. Guillaumai had snapped up 3 trees' worth. Craftsmen from every clan on Gao and beyond had vied for the privilege of creating the sticks, desk, and curiosities she'd had commissioned, predicting that the prestige of creating for her would improve their own mating chances. Guillaumai, in turn, had encouraged them by selecting lesser-known, obscure males for the privilege. The famous ones, she had reasoned, didn't need the help. Now the stick tapped sharply on the decorative stone tiles of the capital station concourse as they left the Gowan ambassadorial quarters. Dominion's security guards, 2 Vizcatic, 2 Coimbra, fell in line behind the entourage of 4 Gowan males from Clan Flashfang, all painfully eager young males, and all, Rigari had seen to this personally, trained to handle threats up to and including a human. It was quite the little procession. Guillaumai had chosen simple charcoal robes that offset her fur, and wore 3 loops of fine gold chain, clasped to each ear. The effect was venerable and dignified, still understated, but enough to make her stand out next to Rigari's severe black uniform or her guards' combat harnesses. This was a big occasion, a galactic broadcast that had taken some negotiation to secure. Even Rigari didn't know what the Mother Supreme had planned for the address she was about to give to the Dominion Grand Council, but he was looking forward to it. Every species had automatic membership and presence on the Grand Council, even if they were not Dominion members. Even if that species was an enthusiastic member of the Kelsey Alliance. There were dissenters, ones who had chosen to side with the Dominion, representing their species. An unpopular minority at home, perhaps, but still there. The only vacant seats belonged to the declining species, who no longer cared to show up, and to the humans. There was a space for them, but it remained unoccupied. Rigari wasn't even sure if the Deathworlders knew that space existed. Guillaumai created a stir when she walked right past the podium that had been set up for her, and instead strode into the area designated for humans. The susurrus this move generated soon became a white noise that only subsided when the chairman, a rotund Vagork, nearly as large as a young Guvnorag, slammed his gavel into the desk in front of him with enough force to dent the wood. "Mother Supreme Guillaumai," he began, addressing her, "that place is for the delegates from Earth."
"The delegates from Earth, Chairman,"
Guillaumai replied, speaking with surprising force and clarity for her age,
"do not know that this seat exists. This council has never seen fit to inform them of it, nor invite them to attend. I am taking the liberty of speaking on their behalf."
The chairman slammed down his gavel again as the gathered species took to muttering to one another. "Can I not persuade you to take the podium?" he asked.
"You cannot, Chairman."
The chairman considered her for a while, then backed down. "Then please, continue." Guillaumai accepted the concession with a slight bow to the chair, then turned to address the council as a whole.
"Gowans and humans share a fondness for base 10 mathematics,"
she began,
"which is why I note that by the calendar of the planet Earth, it has now been exactly 10 years since the hunters raided their city of Vancouver. Less than 3 of their years later, the human race achieved faster-than-light man flight for the first time. Those 10 years have been tumultuous and interesting and often controversial."
She tapped her stick down twice.
"The Dominion's response to this singular Death World species has been one of fear and mistrust. This stick I am holding is a symbol of why that fear is justified. Being made from the wood of a tree now extinct due to them. I am not here to argue against the policy of the last 10 years. The past cannot be undone, but to share a vision of policy for the next 10.
This time the delegates were polite enough to remain silent and listen.
"The humans are here to stay," she announced. "Even if we never see one again, even if they were to retreat behind their quarantine field and remain there, they have already changed the outlook of many species on a great many things. Even now the questions are being asked, why haven't we united to fight the hunters? Why has the Dominion Alliance war gone on for so long without ceasefire or negotiation? Why do we transport goods in vulnerable freighters and lose crews to hunters and piracy, when displacement jump drives render the very concept of a freighter obsolete? I have seen personally just how powerful and dangerous humans are. I have seen for myself some of the plagues that our one human visitor, my clan sister, could have unleashed on the Gao, which would surely have killed our entire species if we had lacked the technology to protect ourselves. Humans are undeniably dangerous, but so too are the tools that were used to build this station. So too are fire or the knives used to prepare food."
She tapped her stick again.
"Unlike those things, humans are thinking, living beings. Fellow intelligent life, which is a rare and precious thing in this galaxy. My clan sister would have wept and been thrown into the kind of despair none of us here can imagine if she had been forced to watch the Gowan people die through no fault of her own. They know, or are learning, that they are dangerous. Where it is already too late for them to prevent the damage, they are trying to repair it as best they can. Where it is not, they are taking precautions to prevent harm on their behalf. Given their absence from this assembly, I humbly beseech the council to—"
She was cut off. Blue lighting, the universal color of emergency and alarm, slammed on, and a deep howl filled the council chamber. She was still standing, bemused by it, ears twitching back and forth when Regari took her by the arm and escorted her with inexorable firmness towards the exit.
"Regari, what is happening?" she asked.
The male's ears were pricked up and his teeth bared, sure signs of stress, alertness, and concentration. He was listening to words that Guillaumai could not hear and reading words she could not see. The station's under attack, he reported tersely.
By whom?
That's still being... His ears rose, then flattened against his skull.
Regari?
The swarm of swarms. He quickened the pace. The hunters are back. HMS Sharman, Folktha, Cimbrian, The Far Reaches, Major Owen Powell.
Fall in! Fall in and listen the fuck up!
The operators had been in the middle of tidying up the barracks and doing basic chores like the washing up and laundry. They immediately dropped what they were doing and fell in around him, giving Powell their full and undivided attention. He didn't skip a beat.
10 minutes ago, our listening post in the Capital System sent back its message buoy, reporting a massive spike in hunter activity on communications channels and several sensor contacts. The swarm's attacking Capital Station. Gear up and get on the shuttle. We dust off in 3. Go! Go!
Gearing up was as simple as grabbing the emergency bags that they all kept in the locker room for this exact reason and sprinting for the waiting shuttlecraft, which had set down on the base's helipad. It was a simple, stock Dominion model, little more than a dull gray cuboid with a window in the front and a door in the back. No human company had yet developed a version that the armed services liked well enough to buy, much to the grumbling of the people who had to use them, who were universally of the opinion that literally anything human-made would have been an improvement. They were aboard and belted in less than 2 minutes. Powell stood towards the front, gripping an overhead strap to stabilize himself as the little craft lurched forward.
Right. This operation is called Novahound, he began, raising his voice over the engines. Lucky for us, we've got an O-plan for this exact scenario. The attack began 10 or 15 minutes ago. Our estimated response time is 40 or 50 minutes. By the time we're on scene, the defending fleet will have been brushed aside and the station itself will have been overrun by hunters for a good half hour. Safe to assume that civilian casualties are total, and in this station's case, that's a good 12,000 people. VIPs, council members, ambassadors, visiting dignitaries have all got security details with them, which we believe makes enough difference. We have schematics for Capital Station. We think we know where they're likely to be holed up. Our mission is rescue and extraction of as many dignitaries and civilians as we can. Secondary objectives include causing as much damage as possible to the swarm, intelligence gathering, and propaganda. We'll be deploying on Caledonia, which has been refit as a staging and hospital ship. The V-class destroyers are the front line. They'll hold the swarm by the nose. They've got the staying power and Iwa. Myrmidon will be serving in its new role as on-field energy support, keeping the V-class charged. Meanwhile, USAF TS-2 squadrons will deliver the killing blows and provide close screen. Both of them are there as a big distraction to let the men on this shuttle accomplish the real mission. Our overwatch is provided by jets, led by Lieutenant Ross aboard HMS Caledonia. Jones, Murray, Price, your covert infiltration and assault. Your job is to drive the outboard and dive onto the station. Effect quiet ingress as close to the target section as possible. Blazinski, Firth, you're on the boat too, as am I. We help secure our foothold, then dig in command. Once we're in, the protectors, that's Ares and Burgess, and defenders, Stevenson, Sykes, Akiyama, and Vandenberg, jump in from the shipboard array. That's the assault team's cue to go monkey shit on the hunters. Leave none of them alive. Delta sets up the evacuation array, then maintains our perimeter and runs combat camera. Protectors, you'll be handling the refugees. Hunters usually kill outright, so there probably won't be a lot of medicine to do. So you're also humping ammo and gear for the assault team. The evac array will be sending the civilians to the deck of HMS Caledonia. We'll be using our default call signs. I'm Stainless. Any questions?
Sir, Stevenson raised his hand. Do we bring a backup array? Powell nodded.
Yes. Any further questions? No. Are we clear?
Yes, sir!
Right. Give me your war names.
Longlegs. Sterling. Highland.
Righteous.
Starfall.
Titan. Thor.
Rebar. Snapfire.
Baseball.
Warhorse.
And don't you fucking forget it, lads. Let's do this right.
Capital Station. Orbiting Planet Garden. Capital System. Dominion Space. Regari. Every shot we fire misses. They're just not there anymore. I don't know where they learned a trick like this, but we're losing ships fast out here, and inflicting no damage that I can see. No hope of holding the field. Rigari was part of a wedge of Gowans pushing against a tide of stampeding life forms. Already one of his men was badly hurt, having been kicked hard by a panicking Vizkatik. His role wasn't to push and shove and shout and try to make room. He was too busy coordinating with the largest and most senior craft in the Gowan contingent of the security fleet, the CGC Winter Fire. "None! Your ETA to the shuttle!" Its captain was a Whitecrest, one of Rigari's brothers both by clan and, he suspected, a half-sibling genetically. "Everything's panicking in here," Rigari grunted, then raised his voice to be heard as a flock of wailing Kuambura became the latest obstacle for them to push against. Most of them are running away from the escape ships for some stupid reason. "How long can you give me? If we let all the others die first?" "A paw of minutes. 6 at the outside." Rigari assessed matters. They had made it only a few 100 meters at best from the council chamber since the attack began. "Not good enough," he declared. "I know. I'm sorry, brother, but at this point we have to treat everything aboard the station as lost. We may as well salvage some assets from this and carry word to Gao of what—" The link went dead with a sharp squeal in Rigari's ear. "Winterfire, you broke up there," he told them. Silence. "Winterfire, come in." "Officer Rigari, CGS Winterfire is destroyed. One of the other ships sent. We're warping out. Nothing we can do. May as well save what we can. Sorry."
"Rigari!"
He turned. The Mother Supreme was leaning heavily against a wall, panting and grimacing with a hand pressed to her chest. "Mother Supreme?" She slumped, sliding to the ground. Concerned males gathered round, and Rigari rushed to her side. "Giamai!"
"Oh, don't," she coughed. "At least my age is getting me first before the hunters do."
The men exchanged glances, aware that they weren't to be so lucky. "We can still—"
"Don't be so stupid,"
she snapped. Then her breath rattled horribly. She was clearly in hideous pain. She continued in a gentler tone.
"Rigari, you can escape. I will only slow you down, and so will these soldiers. Get—"
She heaved and coughed, but fought through it.
"Get to the diplomatic shuttle and activate the emergency displacement recall. Tell them—"
Her strength was failing by the second, and when she repeated,
"Tell them—"
she was almost inaudible. Rigari leaned in close. He only barely heard her last words. He closed her eyes. "I'll tell them," he promised. "Officer," one of the soldiers asked him, clearly expecting an order. "What?" Surveying the ceiling. "What do we do?" "First, you stand back," Rigari ordered. When they did so, he aimed his pulse rifle and blasted the vent cover out of the ceiling with 3 precise shots. "Second," he said, slinging the rifle over his shoulder, "you give me a boost up into that vent." They did so. Gowan gravity was just a little lighter than galactic standard, and between two of them he was launched to the height of a ceiling that could accommodate even the tallest or bulkiest Govnorag. He caught the edge, swung there for a second, and then hauled himself up and into the air duct. And third?" one of the soldiers asked. Rigari unslung his gun and got his bearings. "You kill as many of them as you can, and don't let them take you or your brothers alive," he told them. "Goodbye." HMS Violent, Cimbrian Orbit, the Far Reaches. Commodore William Carruthers. "Signal from HMS Caledonia, Commodore. They say the SOR is aboard, suited up and ready." Carruthers acknowledged the communication with a clear nod and eye contact. "By my estimation, that makes us ready to go," he observed. Violent's captain, Commander Anthony Miller, nodded. "I agree, sir. Signal the fleet to prepare to jump on my mark." He was pleased that it took only some 5 seconds before "All ships ready to jump, Admiral," was called. "Mark!" Carruthers always felt cheated by the occasion of a jump. He would have liked a lurch, or a little jolt, or some tingling sensation, or even just a nondescript sense of something having happened. As it was, the only indication that anything at all had changed was the way his operations display began to populate itself. The untrained eye would have seen only a mess. Carruthers, however, had a very trained eye. The 7 ships of his task group had translated through their wormholes and landed some 10,000 kilometers from Capital Station, far enough away that their minuscule signatures could be easily missed, close enough that the EM spectrum latency shouldn't throw off their targeting or electronic warfare. As they arrived, HMS's Violent, Vigilant, Victory, Vendetta, Vanguard, and Viceroy each quietly released their passenger contingent of 6 BAE Terrier unmanned space vehicles, car-sized lozenges of thrusters, sensors, and electronic attack modules designed to multiply their mothership's electronic superiority and obfuscate the fleet's exact size, composition, and position. The result was an immediate widening of their sensor net, and the hunters weren't bothering with subtlety. Even on passive sensors only, with the full group of 7 warships and 30 drones deployed, he had an excellent idea of exactly what they were dealing with. Capital Station was a white, glass, and chrome broccoli floret 20 kilometers long, ending in a tangled route of rust-brown mooring gantries and docking bays. Describing a rough sphere around it with a radius of some 500 kilometers was the swarm, consisting of literally thousands of ships, including 50 or 60 which were a match in terms of tonnage at least for Myrmidon and Caledonia, both of which were by far the most massive ships in the human fleet. They did not, fortunately, appear to be reacting to the arrival of Deathworlders. "Dragon's Teeth out," he ordered. The Dragon's Teeth had been modified since the last battle at Cimbrian. Their canisters were now filled with high-pressure air rather than using explosives to disperse the mini-satellite jump beacons, allowing them to be deployed without creating an obvious sensor contact. Violent's hull rang as 20 such canisters were launched away from the ship on random timers, creating a friendly sphere of possible evasive jumps. At a range of 10,000 clicks, and with the twin advantages of surprise and EWAR on their side, the fleet was now well prepared to weather a sustained firefight. "Signal the fleet," he announced. "Ready, sir." "Horatio." In the finest of military traditions, Horatio was a prearranged code phrase, meaning that the fleet should load a specific type of ammunition, calculate a specific firing solution, and await the second phrase, which would be the cue to fire. Carruthers gave them the 30 seconds they needed. "Nelson," he ordered. The answer from all 6 ships at once was an opening flurry of firepower, a 2 to 3 to 1 mix of gravity spikes, conventional anti-ship ammunition, and specialist ammo that would hopefully go unnoticed alongside the rest of the firepower. Simultaneously, the EWAR opened up, strobing the swarm with dazzling masers and flooding every band they were broadcasting on with powerful white noise. Those gravity spikes were necessary. Without them, the hunter ships would just warp to point-blank range in the moment they were aligned along the correct vector, eliminating the human rage advantage in an infinitesimal shaving of a second. The only counter to that was gravity spikes, delivered by timed explosion rounds that filled the intervening space with heavily distorted space-time against which warp drives could secure no footing, ensuring that the hunters would remain firmly confined to subluminal maneuvers. The 3 parts of conventional ammunition did their job equally well, however. 4 of the larger swarm craft were crippled in the opening volley, spilling the contents of their pressurized bowels as the human guns thumped and hurled their payloads down a narrow warp channel, which dissipated mere centimeters from the target's hulls, allowing no possibility of evasive action. The swarm responded with animal speed, showing off just how efficient the Hunter cybernetic communications really were. All of those ships were behaving almost like a single amoeboid organism, spreading out and sending loose tendrils of high-speed ships creeping out and around, questing for a vector from which to try and warp the intervening distance and engulf or snare the outnumbered human task group. Several motes of light actually lifted off the surface of Capital Station, abandoning their tick-like burrowing in pursuit of the prized Deathworlder quarry. Carruthers allowed himself a satisfied nod. "Signal Colonel Stewart," he said. "Tell him they've taken the bait." Riley Jackson. "All units, fold your witches and accelerate to combat speed." Riley practically swore with relief. The tension had been killing her, and she obeyed the order enthusiastically, punching Firebird up to speed and aligning for the station as hard as her sled could accelerate. Lurking near the star to recoup their lost energy from the extreme long-range jump from Sol had swiftly gotten dull. She was a combat pilot, and Firebird and her sisters were combat space frames. They belonged in the melee. The wing reported ready. Stewart's voice had an eager edge to match Riley's own feelings. "Epic to group. Off we go." They jumped. Warping to the target station where the British ships had polluted its skies with gravity spikes was asking for damage, which is why the opening salvo had included beacon rounds that streaked through the Hunter formation and slowed to sublight velocities on the far side, inviting the TS-2s to enfilade the swarm. The sky went from empty to being awash with red contacts, painted by the Royal Navy FOF and confirmed by the absence of friendly RFID. Fed by the combat controllers aboard Caledonia, her HUD indicated her assigned box and describing a cuboid some 1,000 kilometers long. At the kinds of speeds reached in starship combat, she would sweep through a volume that large in seconds. Semenza was reciting his EWAR and weapons reports from only inches behind her head. Things had changed in the last couple of years. The missile payload was gone, replaced with electronic attack pods that further multiplied their force's ability to blind and confuse the hunters. Only the GAU-8S remained for their on-board weaponry. A targeting laser speared one of the big ships as she raked its flank with 30mm rounds, shredding its shields. Behind her, Semenza grunted in satisfaction. "Firebird 1, Fox 4. Rather than launching the missiles, he summoned one. There was a stockpile of thousands back on Earth, and one of them jumped into the fight at Semenza's call, existing on the battlefield for barely half a second before it slammed into the swarm ship and mauled it. Data point. The fuckers are armored now, Semenza noted. He was right. In their last fight, that exact same class of missile had dismembered a ship of that size. Now it had merely gouged a ragged chunk from its flank. Hit it again! Wilco, Firebird 1, Fox 4. The wounded swarm ship blinked out of existence, and Semenza's missile spiraled drunkenly off into the black, too confused and low on power to select a new target. Data point, they can evade jump now, Semenza added. An incoming contact became a cloud of gas and light debris as Riley vectored sideways and put a cloud of 30mm rounds in its flight path. Its own railgun rounds went wide, barely 100 meters to starboard. "Stay frosty," she muttered. Rigari. The vent did two things for Rigari. It saved his life, allowing him to walk, then crawl through the narrower ducting, unimpeded and unobserved towards the hangar where the Gowan diplomatic yacht was landed. And it let him hear the screams. It caught and amplified them, so that he heard every one in hollow, magnified, metallic detail. So many of them, intermingled with the sounds of pulse gunfire, the flash and strobe of nerve jam grenades, and a new sound. A heavy explosive sound that reminded him of the action movies he'd watched with Zhu years ago. But mostly screams. Screams of terror, screams of pain, dying squeals and pleading. Defiant yells as some of the soldiers and security troopers went down fighting. Sometimes, when he couldn't hear the screams, he could hear the eating. Those were the worst. He hardly dared move at all in those quiet sections for fear that the lightest sound would give him away. He had to inch past, treated to a full view of what exactly the hunters did with their prey. But his luck held. Either he was silent enough to not give himself away, or else they were so enraptured by their feast as to not notice. He crawled onwards. Owen Powell. When it came down to it, the difference between riding an outboard launch wearing a wetsuit and riding an extravehicular launch wearing an EV mass was basically that the latter was quieter. No waves, no bird call, none of the little noises that had hitherto masked every covert infiltration of Powell's career. Just silence, save for his breathing. The craft itself was little more than a conical bank of capacitors mounted on a kinetic thrust plate, with latching points for the infiltration team and any heavy gear they were bringing to be attached and folded inside its little warp field. It almost looked like a black rubber launch. Across the huge distances involved, it relied on computer navigation rather than a pilot, so there was little to do but program it, hang on, and hit the button on the control screen at the little vehicle's nose. He had never felt so exposed in all his life. There was no jolt or anything. The inertial compensation provided by the warp field was too well tuned for that. But it was still jarring for HMS Caledonia to vanish from behind them and for Capital Station, which had until now just been a nigh invisible glimmer of light, suddenly to be there, right in front of them. 20 kilometers long and only 2 kilometers away. Technically, they were smack in the middle of the swarm of swarms, but at the scales involved, human senses were hopelessly inadequate for noticing that fact.
Only the occasional streak of light across the stars, weapons fire, or a ship moving at sanity-fraying velocities hinted that there was even a battle raging silently all around them.
If their stealthy approach was not stealthy enough, if the Ewar that was theoretically blinding every sensor delicate enough to spot them wasn't, then the only mercy would be that their annihilation would be so instant and total that none of them would notice it happening. The last approach used cold gas thrusters rather than the kinetics. The launch was designed to have practically zero sensor signature after all. It had been a precision approach. They were barely 10 meters from the station hull, stationary relative to a large window, though the mirroring on the glass made it impossible to see within, only that the section was not lit. They detached from the launch, and Powell turned a single gentle somersault to kiss against the hull, absorbing the last of his momentum with his knees just as they practiced in zero-G training so many times before. Breaching the glass was simple. Sterling and Highland hacked a simple square out of the glass with 2 simple swipes of their fusion knives. Air pressure did the rest, flinging the plate of glass out into space, along with a blizzard of small objects caught in the rush of escaping air. Legsy heaved himself through. There was a moment of silence. "Clear." Powell hit the beacon on his belt as the combat controllers propelled themselves through the breach, and an inky cuboid, nearly invisible in space, simply appeared without ceremony next to him. Divorced of its power source, the stasis field collapsed, and Warhorse, Baseball, Titan, Thor, Rebar, and Snapfire were hanging next to him. He let them through the hole first, and, once through himself, settled onto the deck in galactic standard gravity. The Deltas deployed a force field seal over the breach, and, at their nod, Legsy and Sterling burst through the door into the corridor beyond, pushing past the hurricane rush of air that flooded into their entry room. Their SMGs spat out their rounds with a noise that went right through Powell's chest. He was pleased to hear it. The silence of vacuum had been getting to him, and any sound was welcome, even if it wasn't a pleasant sound. Shrieking, alarms, wailing aliens, and the distant hammering of Hunter pulsefire, plus an unpleasant hissing. Apparently their force field wasn't as airtight as hoped.
"Right. Let's get into an airtight compartment," he ordered.
They vacated the room and sealed the door behind them. Ares raised his saw and fired a sharp 6-round burst at something, and Powell suppressed some pride when he turned and saw that the kid had just bagged his first Hunter kill. He was in commander mode right now. He couldn't afford to be sentimental. Legsy, Highland, and Sterling took point, storming down the corridor and ripping into a knot of Hunters that were tormenting a shuddering Govnorag. All 5 of the monsters were dead before they even knew they were under assault. The huge alien was in a bad way, bleeding horribly from where the Hunters had bitten the flesh right off her living body. Burgess went to work, and Powell took a moment to evaluate their position. It was some kind of a common area, full of benches and tables, and the kind of alien-sized furniture that made good high cover for humans. Better still, there was plenty of room for the defenders to deploy their jump array.
"This is our spot,"
he announced. The Alpha of the brood that builds.
"Interest. A human Alpha. The first we have seen."
The Builder Alpha examined the perspective of the little insect-sized spy drone as it settled on the ceiling above the Deathworlder. The human infantry had appeared from nowhere, storming out of a supposedly empty room on the station's upper decks without warning. They might almost have materialized in that room fully formed. Impossible, of course, but then again that kind of stealth was only marginally more credible, especially from a species so technologically behind the Hunters. This particular specimen was clearly in command, having started by thrusting its arm out to indicate where its subordinates should go, and what work they should do, and now poring over a diagram of that section of the station, directing the efforts of the other 11. The Alpha of Alphas was clearly intrigued also. It had a much more complete view of the battlefield than the Builder Alpha did, ensconced as it was in a kind of command throne that was designed to interface with its neural augmentations and greatly expand its ability to track and consider the situation. It had proven itself in battle against these humans, receiving only minor wounds at worst. Now it was proving itself as a commander and leader.
"Correction. Not just an Alpha."
It mused.
"Observation. Notice the markings on their armor. There are 3 different Deathworlder broods here. Each fulfills a different role. This is an Alpha of many broods. It must be an individual of great importance."
The Builder broadcast understanding and agreement.
"Fascination. Interesting. that their broods function together through division of duty.
It commented.
Inspiration, and that displacement device, the possibilities. Satisfaction. Observing that device in action alone has been worth this trap.
The Alpha of Alphas agreed.
Thoughtfulness, and the specialized behavior of their warriors can be translated to our own broods. This is valuable data.
They watched the Deathworlders slaughter lesser hunters by the dozen for some minutes. The violence was almost intimidating. Even from a cloaked listening post far removed from the action, the lead team of 3 would enter a compartment, and every hunter within the compartment would be dead almost too quickly to fathom, cut down by withering volleys of disciplined firepower. There was an objective to it, though. They weren't killing for the sake of killing. Instead, every time the humans surged forward, it was to claim another little knot of surviving prey, plucking them from the hunter's grasp and securing the meat the opportunity to escape. Dozens had escaped already, most of them the important, high-value individuals whose deaths would have so demoralized the prey across the galaxy. Each dignitary that escaped to whatever sanctuary the Deathworlders had established beyond their displacement array was a personal insult to the Alpha of Alpha's plan. Why they should do so was incomprehensible to the Alpha of the brood that builds. Why would superior life forms put themselves in harm's way to rescue inferior ones that were not even the same brood or species? It sensed that there was no answer to that conundrum within the remit of engineering. For their part, the hunters' responses to human weaponry just didn't seem to be giving them the edge that the builder had hoped for. The guns were just too heavy, and needed to be held in too specific a way so as to avoid injury. If only they could capture a working example of the weapons the humans themselves were using. As they watched, a family of spindly blue prey were herded into the territory the humans had seized, and vanished through the displacement device. Just behind them was the wounded large prey, actually being carried by 2 of the Deathworlders. The builder revised its estimates as to human maximum muscle strength upwards by several percentage points.
Curiosity. Those 2 seem to prioritize the repair and evacuation of wounded prey.
It noted.
Contempt. Yes, while that is an obvious sign of weakness and wrong thinking, it will also potentially undermine our intimidation of the prey.
The Alpha of Alpha's thoughts were tinged with anger at this damage to their propaganda victory.
Suggestion. I submit that we have gathered enough data. Those humans should be eradicated, their displacement device salvaged, and we should capture that Alpha of many broods.
The builder proposed. It did not take the silence that greeted this idea for hesitation or contempt. The Alpha of Alphas had demonstrated its intelligence and cunning time and again. It was undoubtedly mulling the suggestion over, considering the merits and potential risks.
Resolve. Agreed.
It sent at last.
I will deploy the strongest brood.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it as always. This has been a very long day of recording. I have recorded several chapters of Deathworlders and a short story, and I don't remember what else. But anyway, guys, we finally got through Warhorse. It only took years. I will be recording more often. I've tried to do it every Thursday, but but sometimes things get in the way. Like I had to buy a car last week. That was super fun. I hate that adversarial process, though I'm not afraid of it, and I did come out okay. I've never paid above MSRP for a car, and Jesus Christ, I was not going to try to start now. Oof. It was fucking rough just to get them to get rid of the delivery fee and the fucking... I don't need the extras that they added onto the car. I don't care about those. So I got them to take that stuff off and an additional like $1,000, and that's it. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. What was your favorite teacher? My favorite teacher was Mr. Sievering. He was an English teacher and he was awesome.
I really liked my choir teacher as well, but he wasn't. He was more like my director for a lot of things, so I don't necessarily consider him my teacher only. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe, go to the Patreon, and I will bless you with many kisses upon your head. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!